This is The Road Show, and I'm your host, David Warren. Well, back with us is one of my faves, Dana K. White, and she has a word from the Lord. Here it is. Jesus doesn't care about your messy house. He cares about your heart. Dana's company is called A Slob Comes Clean, which is a reality-based cleaning, decluttering, and organizing business. I like to call it a ministry. We've got a lot to discuss, so let's get started by welcoming back Dana K. White. Good to have you back on the airwaves of Oasis Radio Network, Dana.
Thank you so much for having me on again. This is really fun.
Well, I asked you on our previous interview why you added the initial K to Dana White, because in the early days, you were just Dana White. And you told us the reason why. Tell us again, and now I know why you have to differentiate, because this guy's pretty famous, but so are you.
I'm sure he's worried. No. If you Google Dana White, you are going to find a man who's bald, which is fine, right? But he is not me. He is the owner, starter, founder of the Ultimate Fighting Championship, which is just kind of a different vibe than decluttering strategies, which is what I do. So, yeah, I put the K in there just to make myself Googleable, I guess.
You know what? I bet he's heard of you by now. You're pretty famous.
I will occasionally get emails from people who will say, oh my goodness, this thing came across my feed or whatever. And I was like, what? Dana White? And often it'll be, his net worth is bajillions of dollars. And I'm like, yeah, that's not me. For sure, that's not me.
Not yet. Not yet.
Yeah.
You're heading that way. Okay, your new book. I love the title. Jesus doesn't care about your messy house. He cares about your heart. Tell us about coming up with that title.
Well, I write about decluttering. I write about getting your house under control. That was never the thing I wanted to write about. My story is that I wanted to be a writer, wanted to write to encourage women, and God very clearly directed me to write about this because, it was out of desperation in the beginning. My house was a disaster. I thought I was going to write about getting my house under control as a temporary thing. Mm-hmm. It was anonymous in the beginning. I thought I'll get my house under control and then I'll start writing about the things that I, was excited about writing about. And instead, it turned out that this was the thing that God had for me all along, because I realized there was a missing piece out there, which was the piece I needed, which was writing about organizing from the perspective of someone who it's completely unnatural to, like me, right? And so I wrote my first several books, and then was like, okay, well, what's next? Every time I write a book, I think, that's it. I'm done. I have no more words. And then I had really been thinking about how much I wanted to write about just what God was teaching me about grace and the futility of me thinking I'm in control and self-sufficient and all of that. And I thought, okay, well, how am I going to make that leap, right? Like, how am I going to make the leap from writing about decluttering and cleaning to writing about Jesus? I thought, okay, but that's really what I felt called to do. And then I was on vacation, which is often when God kind of takes my brain being a little bit relaxed, and just the title came into my brain, and I went, oh, okay, that's how I do this. Yes, I can share what God has taught me about grace, and I can do it using the platform that he's given me and the subject matter, because I do know that from personal experience that this is a real issue for a lot of people, specifically for a lot of women, specifically for a lot of Christian women who, feel like it's a spiritual failure to struggle in this area. And so it's really an exploration of what grace is, what a relationship with Christ looks like lived out every single day. And it's using this strangely specific and divisive issue as a way to explore, the grace of God.
Well, you mentioned that this new book, Jesus Doesn't Care About Your Messy House, He Cares About Your Heart, is about your own spiritual growth, which happened to coincide with your growing understanding of how to keep a house under control. As you said, you had been writing books about that. But looking back over these past many years as you've been writing, what are some of the spiritual lessons you've learned along the way?
Yeah, I grew up in a home where I now know that I was extremely blessed. I'm very thankful that my parents truly lived out their faith, right? And so I was very steeped in, understanding of God and God's grace and His desire to be part of every single part of our lives. But it was not until I really got into reading Scripture on a daily basis for myself that it all became so real, and it just those nuanced things of like truly understanding grace and understanding that my understanding didn't come from effort on my part, but it came from the Holy Spirit. All of those things that I learned, and at the same time I was working on my house, and I had truly thought when I started working on my house that there would come a point where God would show me the verse or the spiritual concept or something that was going to make all of this easy. And instead, as I was working on my house, I was realizing, my brain works differently than the brain of naturally organized people. That's why the advice that most people give didn't actually make sense to me. And as I was realizing that, I was also in Scripture and seeing, the grace that God has, that the desire He has for me personally to have a relationship with Him, that He created me the way that He created me. It was not a mistake, and that it's actually an opportunity for me to trust in God. A struggle is not just a bad thing. It's actually a gift if it helps me see, I was never self-sufficient anyway, right? When Paul talks about my grace is sufficient for you, not his grace, but God's grace was sufficient for him in this struggle that he had begged God to take away, very similar to my struggle in my house that I had begged God to take away. And God said, you know what? No, because my power is made perfect in your weakness. Like by you being weak, then you have understanding of your need for me. You have understanding of who I am. And so that helped me to rest in God's grace, not as a way to, it doesn't matter about my house. No, it's not a spiritual issue. And when I took away this feeling that me having, a natural tendency toward messiness was some sort of a spiritual failure, then it gave me the freedom to really work in my house and gave me such depth and understanding of my relationship with God.
Well, did you feel pressure from people and other ladies in your church? Were you comparing yourself to them, or what made you feel bad about yourself in regard to your home?
Yes. Not specific women that I'm going to say, but this is very common, and it's very common, especially for a Christian woman. I was a stay-at-home mom. That was my life dream. I wanted to be home with my kids. And I had always thought, once I'm home with my kids, and that is where I put my time and my effort and my focus, it's going to be easy for me, because other things in life, when I put my time and my effort and my focus on them, I could do them. Well, I got to this point and I couldn't. And so then I was like, okay, there's something wrong with me. And when I would ask for advice for someone to whom this stuff is not a struggle, they might give me, I pray while I'm doing my dishes. And I'm like, okay, but if praying while I'm doing my dishes is not actually changing how my house is, then what am I missing something? Is there something wrong with my relationship with God when they absolutely may be looking at these, household tasks as an act of worship? And I'm like, and yet I'm just completely bumfuzzled, completely don't understand what's going on. I think I'm doing what they're doing. My house is still a disaster. Then it made me question, is there something wrong in my relationship with God? And just to be honest, a lot of times when people are trying to be encouraging and they do bring in, God is a God of order, and that's great and true, right? But it didn't actually help me know what to do. And so therefore, when I couldn't keep my house in order, then I was like, okay, well, what's wrong with me? Where in reality, I needed the down and dirty help. Like, hey, you need to wash your dishes every single day. Here's why. Here's why you struggle. Here's what you think is the reason why you shouldn't. And here's actually the reality of how that all plays out, which is what I do now, right? Like I teach the down and dirty of how this all works. And so I don't know that anybody was cruel, although I will say I have received emails from hundreds of women who have had cruel things said to them. And I don't think the intentions were cruel necessarily. They were said out of a desire to help. And yet for the person who doesn't see things the way that the person who's trying to give help sees things, it can be very hurtful.
Well, Dana, you have a background in theater arts, so you are what we call right-brained. And do you think that probably the problem this whole time was that the world was trying to convince everybody to declutter and clean and do all the rest of the stuff, reorganize with a left-sided brain? And so that was really the niche that God was saving you for to help the rest of us, creative types.
Well, exactly. And I think I'm going to focus on the word that you said, convince. Right, is the world was trying to convince me to declutter or people to declutter. And the reality was I never needed to be convinced that my house should be under control, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I never liked it. I never wanted my house that way. And yet you will hear people often say, oh, well, she must just like living that way. She must not care. And that was always incredibly hurtful because I did care, but I couldn't show somebody I cared because my house was a mess, right? Mm-hmm. And so it was never an issue of not caring. It was literally an issue of not knowing what to do. And so I would try and I would think I was doing what other people were doing, and it didn't actually make the impact on my home. And so that's where I come in as I know you care, right? Like I am not here to convince you to declutter. I'm here to teach you what to actually do to declutter. And that's where that's what I needed, which I just had to kind of figure it out. But as I help people, that's one of the main things that brings tears to people's eyes, honestly.
Really?
When I'm speaking is I'm like, I'm not here to convince you because I know you already care. Let's skip all that part.
Yeah.
And let's get to actually what to do. And people are like, thank you. Because it's not an issue of not caring.
Well, you have created what's called the no mess decluttering method. So how did you come up with the method?
Lots and lots of trial and error.
Okay.
I mean, like so much trial and error. It really came down to I was facing my whole house, and my whole house was disastrous. And everybody has a space in their home. Well, I won't say everybody. Most people have a space in their home that they look at it and they think, I can't, and they just want to close the cabinet door, close the drawer, whatever, and walk away. Like,
right.
This is too much. I just can't do it. Where basically every space in my home was overwhelming to me, partly because of the actual stuff and partly because I didn't know what to do, right? And so I was naturally overwhelmed at this. So I had to figure out a way to break through that overwhelm. And so as I did that, I started to realize, okay, if I will just do the things I already know to do first, where in reality, you look at a space and sometimes you think, I need to deal with these hard things first. No, let me get the easiest stuff done. And then that gets me into a state where I've gathered some momentum, I see some impact, and then I'm ready to deal with the harder things later. So I started just doing it that way. But I also realized that the number one thing that would stop me from decluttering was that every time I tried to declutter, I ended up creating
more clutter.
More clutter. I made a bigger mess. It was a chaotic situation that was very stressful for me, for the whole family. So I would, I thought, because people would tell me this, most people would say, you've got to pull everything out of the space to get started. Well, I would do that. I would look at the space and think, wow, it looks amazing empty, right? And I was like, oh, okay. And then I would turn around, and then I had an entire floor full or table full of stuff spread out everywhere. And then I would shut down from that and not be able to actually move forward. Or I would make a little bit of progress, make all these piles and things, and then life would happen. I would step away, and those piles just lived in this space, long term. And so because of that, I was always putting off decluttering, because I thought, well, last time I gave myself 45 minutes and I made so much worse, and it was totally chaotic for 3 months after that. You know what? I'm going to wait until I have a whole day. Okay, you know what? Actually, I'm going to wait until I have a whole weekend. Okay, let's just wait until vacation time. Well, who wants to spend their time decluttering on vacation, right? And so I would put it off. It would get worse. It would get more overwhelming. I would estimate more time. So I had to find a way to just go ahead and start making little bits of progress and not looking at, I'm going to have this big shebang of it's going to be a whoosh, whoosh before and after like they have on TV. And instead, I'm just going to make the space better.
So Dana,
change my goal to making it better.
What was it like back in the day when the doorbell would ring?
Panic.
Yeah.
Heart palpitations. I mean, it was scary, because I could live my life and I could function really well within the clutter. I think that's one of the miscommunications between people who are naturally organized and people who are not, is that people who are naturally organized will say, hey, you've got to get your house under control so that you can function and so you can concentrate and so you can do these things. I'm like, well, actually, the reason that a lot of us have a house that's out of control is we can function and we can concentrate in the midst of the mess until all of a sudden we can't because it's gotten so bad, right? But so I would be living my life and I would be functioning and doing the things that I need to do, and then the doorbell would ring and it's like my eyes would just open to, oh my goodness, there's stuff everywhere. This is so embarrassing. I can't let anybody in. I would make excuses to talk outside, or pretend I wasn't home, or just was a panic moment. I remember a friend needing, she was like, hey, we haven't seen each other in forever, and I'm coming through your town, and is there any way that we could stop at your house and so the dogs can run around in the backyard? I don't remember now what I said, like what my excuse was for why that couldn't happen. But I still look back at that and I feel terrible because I was like, it was 30 minutes. Like I couldn't get my house to a point that was not completely humiliating in the time that she gave me. So, but I wanted to be the person who could say, absolutely, of course you can stop by my house. And so I wasn't able to be the person I wanted to be because my house was holding me back.
Okay, Dana K. White is back with us today, and she has a new book out called Jesus Doesn't Care About Your Messy House. He Cares About Your Heart. And I love the take you have on the Proverbs 31 woman in this new book. And I never knew this, but you pointed out that in this Bible chapter, which is Proverbs 31, talking about what we consider the perfect, godly woman, that cleanliness is never mentioned, nor is organized, orderly, neat, or tidy. Did that surprise you when you had that revelation?
It did. It did. I knew that this was the book. I knew that God had showed me, Dana, I was never asking you to have a perfect house. I just wanted your heart. I want your heart to be turned toward me. And I was like, okay, well, I got to write this book. And what's the number one thing people will say when they're talking about, cleanliness and keeping your house under control? Well, the example that they'll give is the Proverbs 31 woman. So I thought, okay, well, I need to go and dive right in. Well, I dove right in and I saw that there's no mention of how clean her house was, how organized her house was, that her family could always, find what they needed when they needed it. There's no mention of that. There's a lot of mention of her caring about her family, her taking care of her family, her having what they needed when they needed it, people depending on her. She was a businesswoman. And honestly, the things that it described the women I know who struggle with their homes. She was very productive. And I think that The reason there's an assumption that her house was perfect is that it's very clear that she's not lazy, right? Like she's very productive. And there is an assumption that a messy house is the result and can only be the result of laziness. And that is a hard thing to tackle, right? But the truth is that it can be, of course, but in my case, and in so many cases of the women who I work with on a daily basis, laziness is not the issue. It's not a lack of desire. It's not even a lack of working. It's a lack of understanding of which things are going to move the needle. So that's where I would grow so frustrated in my home, is I was like, I'm working on it all the time. I'm constantly, doing things, and it just doesn't have the impact. Well, part of it was just I had more stuff than I had space for. I had more stuff than I could handle, right? And so I could vacuum and do all that, and then you live life for a little bit, and all those things just kind of tumble out of the places where I shoved them. And it was a lack of understanding and not a lack of working on it. And so, yeah, that gave a lot of freedom when, I mean, we don't all have to sell to the merchants, to be the perfect godly woman like, she is described in Proverbs 31. And yet, I think it's really important that there was no mention whatsoever of, how clean her house was.
And before we take our break, I think we should also mention that nowhere in that chapter does it say that she cooked.
Yes, exactly.
So
exactly.
So takeout can be godly as well.
Exactly.
Dana K. White has written a new book called Jesus Doesn't Care About Your Messy House. He Cares About Your Heart. I'm David Warren, your host. We've been talking about cleanliness as it relates to spiritual growth. When we come back, I want to ask Dana about the psychological side of cleanliness. Back after this. I'm David Warren, here with some exciting news for Oasis listeners. We have a new mobile device app. It's free, easy to download, and lets you enjoy our refreshing music and talk everywhere you go. If you have an Android cell phone, go to the Google Play Store. And if you have an iPhone or iPad, visit the Apple Store and search for Oasis Radio Network. Be an Oasis ambassador and share this news with family and friends around the world.
Oasis Roadshow.
Dana K. White is back with us, and she has written a new book called Jesus Doesn't Care About Your Messy House. He Cares About Your Heart. And this is out on Thomas Nelson Publishers, available wherever books are sold. Also, the audiobook, which Dana reads, is on audible.com. And you can check out more about the book and today's guest on her website, aslobcomesclean.com. Okay, you had a real winning formula with your other books. Was Thomas Nelson nervous with you making a departure a little bit, or were they all in?
That's a great question. My previous books have done very well. They've kind of quietly done well, if that makes sense. I didn't hit the New York Times bestseller list or anything like that. Decluttering the Speed of Life, I think several years after it came out, hit the Wall Street Journal bestseller list. They've just continued to sell really well. And so because of that, they were fine with me writing whatever book I wanted to write.
Good.
As I've told people, I'm like, I don't know that I could have pitched this book if it wasn't for the success of the previous two books, because this struggle in your home, this struggle and the shame around it, and the reality of, I'm trying and yet it doesn't seem to actually make a difference, all of those things kind of had to be proven to actually be out there in the market, because it's not the most fun thing to talk about, God had to really, really work in me to let me be willing for this to be the thing that I was going to do with my life, because it's much more fun to talk about how fun it is to be organized as opposed to the real struggle down and dirty of it, right? And so I think the previous books proved that there is a market, and therefore they were, very receptive to this book where we dive into the shame side of things.
Your other books have really been about what's going on the outside, the world in which these mostly women live, but this book is about what's going on the inside. And this is where you're like,
right.
This is what really matters. I mean, Jesus does care if you care about your messy house, but he really cares about your heart. That's what he most cares about. That's
right.
what I got out of it.
Well, and he understands. God understands that this is a struggle because he made my brain the way he made it. It was not a mistake, that he made me creative and in a way that I see the world differently. I see my physical space differently. I'm able to zero in on something and let things go in my home. And, that's not a mistake. It's on purpose. And there's a lot of great things from that. There's also some struggles, that come along with that.
For the clean freaks out there, and I might be one of those, you could almost write another book called Jesus Doesn't Care About Your Perfect House. He cares about your heart, because that's the other side of the ditch.
It really is. It really is, because in the same way that I struggled because I couldn't do it, I know that there are many who are focused on their house being perfect out of a thought and a desire to please God, right? Where I was the person who, okay, well, if that's how I'm supposed to please God, then there's no hope for me because I can't do it. You can absolutely get caught up in that self-sufficiency and a lack of understanding of what God is actually looking for. So my hope would be that, we find the grace, whatever side of that we're on, in understanding that Jesus was never asking for us to have a perfect home or be perfect, right? Like he wants us to be holy, which can only come from him, because we can't be holy on our own.
You wrote something in the book that resonated with my personality, Dana, David Warren here. You wrote, housekeeping is the task you tackle in order to squash your panic over the other things you can't figure out how to change. That sounds like what a therapist would say, Dana. How did you come to that realization that it's like, well, I can at least control my house, even though I can't control some of these other outside factors that are really bothering me?
Right. Well, and control is what it all comes down to, right? I have real issues with control. And I think we all do, right? But I get very panicky in certain situations where I can't control the situation. And what God has shown me was, Dana, you've never been the one in control. It is an illusion, a delusion. Again, I'm not a mental health professional, so but it's not real, right? Like resting in what God has done is the only way, right? And anything that I let myself focus on as a way to control is very likely getting me off track of my focus on where it needs to be, which is God.
Interesting. Okay, we all have messy people in our lives, and we may be the messy person. What is the best way to support these people in our lives?
Well, I think it's number one is validating the legitimacy of the struggle and understanding that they do care and that they are trying, okay? And understanding that if it's natural for you to see a space and see what's out of place and move, the things that don't need to be in the place and all that, if that's natural to you, to understand that they don't see it the same way that you see it, right? Like it's not natural to them, and that is legitimate and valid, right? And understand that there may be, there probably are communication gaps going. Like one of the things that I teach people that I realized, and I'm actually really thankful for I'm very thankful, obviously, for how God has worked through this being the thing that I teach, decluttering, is when I was in the beginning and I was just writing on a blog for, my own benefit, basically. I mean, I was trying to learn about blogging because I wanted to do that about something else eventually. As I would write things, then people were reading it and they would say, what? I never realized that either. And it helped me see, I'm not the only one who sees things. There are people who see things one way and people who see things another. So the container concept is one of the things that I teach that's very transformational for people who see the world the way that I see it, that people who are naturally organized don't know that we don't know. And so when we're having these conversations, we're talking about things in different ways, but we don't know that we're talking about things in different ways, right? So the container concept is that, I realized that containers are not for putting things in. Containers are meant to serve as limits, right? Like the word contain is inside the word container. So in the same way that firefighters work to contain a fire, and, they create a boundary, and if they can keep the fire inside that boundary, they can keep it under control. If it goes outside the boundary, then that's when bad things happen, right? And so their goal is to contain the fire, to keep it within this space. And when I realized, a container's purpose is to be the limit, then it changed how I looked at my space, and I was like, okay, well, if I have this shelf is a limited space. It's a defined space. And if I'm going to put my cookbooks on the shelf, then the shelf decides how many cookbooks I keep, instead of me deciding how many cookbooks I keep. And my brain, the way it's wired, would be, okay, well, how many times do I cook a week? And how many times do we have special occasions? And what about this? And about this one and this? And I would look at each item and assess the value of that item. And then I would keep all these cookbooks and not have the space for them in my home, where when I said, okay, the shelf is the cookbook shelf, it's the limit, that I put my favorite ones on first. And when that shelf was full, it triggered in my brain, it's full. That's how many cookbooks I can keep. It's not so much about, is it a good cookbook? It's about, is it a good enough cookbook to deserve shelf space, in this space? And when I was writing about that, I honestly think that if I was figuring this out, not in a public, though anonymous way, there in the beginning, I would never have shared the container concept, because once I realized it, it was so obvious that it was kind of embarrassing, right? Like, I don't think I would teach people this concept. But because I was writing about it as I was learning, and other people said, what? I've never thought of containers in that way. I've never thought of that. Then I was able to see that for the people whose brains work like mine, that is a transformational concept that somebody who is naturally organized doesn't know needs to even be taught, because it's more natural to them, right? And so what I would say for someone who wants to help someone else is, yes, it's a legitimate problem. Understand that you don't need to convince them that their life would be easier. They know that, right? But also understand that there are things that you may need to learn in order to communicate with them in a way that actually makes sense to them.
And one way you can learn is by going to A Slob Comes Clean and start learning the No Mess Decluttering Method by one Ms. Dana K. White. The new book is called Jesus Doesn't Care About Your Messy House. He Cares About Your Heart, out on Thomas Nelson Publishers, available wherever books are sold. And again, Dana voices the book as an audiobook on audible.com, and she does it with a lot of flair, folks. That website address, again, is A Slob Comes Clean. I'm David Warren, talking with Dana, who is one of the world's leading decluttering experts. She has mentioned this thing called the container concept, but she has coined a whole lot of other tricks of the trade, and I want to ask her about those after this break.
I'm Karen Jensen Salisbury, one of the hosts you hear on the Oasis Network Roadshow. For 35 years, this 1 hour of the day has inspired and motivated you, our listeners, with thousands of stories of people whose lives demonstrate the truth that with God, all things are possible. It's an hour that you should make a part of your day, Monday through Friday, starting at 1 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Central. The Roadshow, an Oasis Network presentation.
Here's a little bit about today's guest, Dana K. White. By the way, what does K stand for, Dana?
It's Catherine.
Dana Catherine White is the creator of the No Mess Decluttering Method and, much to her own surprise, a decluttering expert. Dana shares realistic home management strategies and a message of hope for the hopelessly messy in her books Organizing for the Rest of Us, Decluttering at the Speed of Life, which happens to be a Wall Street Journal bestseller, and How to Manage Your Home Without Losing Your Mind. And by the way, two of these books I have interviewed Dana about, and they are archived in the Roadshow section of our website, oasisnetwork.org. Dana's website is a slobcomesclean.com, and she also has a new other website since we spoke last called declutteringcoaches.com. We are all ears about this website. What is it about, Dana?
So I realized that I have written and I have spoken and I have shared on video my strategies, right? Like, if someone wants to learn how to take their house from complete disaster to a state where they can keep it under control, I'm not going to tell you how to color code your cabinets. That's not what I'm going to do. But I will tell you how to get your house under control and how to keep it under control. And so I've taught all of those things. And yet there are many people who need someone to personally guide them through their own stuff and space. And so about 3 years ago, I started declutteringcoaches.com. It's a training for decluttering coaches. So I've heard many horror stories from, my followers of having brought someone in to help them in their home, professional organizers, and that person not understanding how to actually communicate with them on their stuff, or, doing the opposite of the no mess decluttering process and pulling everything out and then leaving, and then they're left worse off than they were before, So those stories, and knowing that my process works exceptionally well when you're guiding someone else through their clutter, because I removed emotions from the process, let you feel the emotions, but we're not going to use those emotions to actually make these decisions. I realized there was a need for decluttering coaches. I wanted to be able to say, this person can help you. They know my process. They're going to not shame you, but they're going to lead you through making real change in your home. And so I started Decluttering Coaches. So I have a training course that I do, and then those who go through that, if they want to, they can be certified, and they're actually listed on the site. So I have a really cool map on declutteringcoaches.com that shows you if there's someone in your area, and even areas where there, isn't a coach nearby at this point. We're hoping to get there someday. But most of the coaches also do online coaching, and that has been really effective and exciting. Like I had an email from someone just recently who sent me her before and after pictures, and she said, yes, you can use them, which is gold, right? Mm-hmm. That I can use these before and after pictures. But, she wanted her daughter to come visit, and her daughter, there was no place for her to stay in the home because the guest room was literally piled, above her head with stuff and boxes, because that happens in guest rooms and offices and craft rooms where you kind of just start sticking things and then it gets out of control. And she worked with one of the coaches, I think over the course of 10 weeks virtually, and that room is completely decluttered, and her daughter was thrilled, to have a wonderful space to be able to come and visit. And so, I've got people out there who I can wholeheartedly recommend because they have been through the training. They've done the assessments. We check and make sure they really do understand how to communicate with people and how to work through this process with people and what people actually need to get rid of their stuff. So it's been really fun. It's been really, really fun. Their stories, my coaches' stories of, this is what I was meant to do with my life, is help people, in this way. It's been very, very fun.
I love that. You're teaching people how to fish in a way.
Yes.
Not doing all the fishing yourself.
And that's the thing is I'm teaching it. If you want, there's I'm definitely not saying that the first step is to hire somebody to come in. There's so much to learn, and there's so much that, I have thousands of stories of people who have learned the process and implemented it in their home. But if you do need someone to guide you personally through the process, now that exists as well.
I have a question for you, because I don't think it's just me, but anytime I listen to your podcast, which is called A Slob Comes Clean, I feel motivated to clean my house, organize my house, declutter. Do you get a lot of that from your listeners? I
do. I think that it just pairs so well, the podcast. I started my podcast in 2013, I believe, and that was, early on in the podcasting time, and it just worked so well because it's about cleaning. You can play it and do the actual thing that we're talking about as you're listening, and so I think that that's great. I love hearing from people who, will tell me that they've listened to the books. I have a few people who will tell me, I've listened to the books, like something they got on, I don't know if it's on Audible or whatever, where they got some report that said, you've listened to this book 57 times for a total of so many hundred hours.
Wow.
And they'll just tell me, I just turn on the book. I just listen to it, and it gets me back in focus and gets me back on track.
Well, those are the people who don't mind when the doorbell rings. I guarantee you that, Dana. I mentioned that you've coined some phrases. Some of the favorites of mine are slob vision, dishes math, clutter threshold, and you mentioned the container concept a little earlier. And I want to read just a short passage from your new book, Jesus Doesn't Care About Your Messy House, He Cares About Your Heart. You wrote, when I make decisions about whether something is container worthy, I'm asking myself, does it deserve space in my home? But in my spiritual life, the question is, does this deserve space in my heart? Does it fit in the identity Jesus has given me? That should be on a poster, Dana. I love it.
Yeah. I think it's that that the physical world. There's so much imagery that God has put into the physical world for the purpose of knowing Him, right? And a gardener knows this. They know. I know when my little teeny bit of limited experience with gardening, because I'm terrible at it, just things come alive to me because when I am yanking and pulling on that weed and it's just trying so hard to stay in the ground, and I just have this understanding spiritually of, sin and all these, growth and all these spiritual concepts that come alive. There's also the same thing just in the physical world of the reality of space, the reality of limited space and the fact that if I try to keep more stuff than will fit in my space and be functional, then there is no hope of my house being under control. It's like, then that is a picture of this spiritual truth of, I have an identity in Christ. He gave me my identity as one of His children. And therefore, there are things that just don't fit in that. And I can wish that they did. I can try to shove them in anyway, but the reality is they don't fit. And just that physical experience of that gives me understanding of the spiritual parallel.
Well, and the container concept in one's personal or spiritual life is really about time, isn't it? Because you were doing some good things, but there was a better thing that your time should have been used on.
Absolutely. Did I give an example in the book? Because I can't remember.
Well, you talked about your Bible reading, that you were,
Yes.
It was getting passed over because you were doing good things, but there was no time left after that. It's the container concept. You had filled your container of time with other things.
Yes. When I started really diving into Bible study, in the beginning, I was going to a Bible study, and the homework part of it scared me, right? I would venture to say that a lot of people listening have heard about Bible studies that involved homework and thought, I can't do that, right? But I wanted my kids to be in the kids program, and so I started going, and I was just kind of skating by and doing all my homework on Tuesday night, or getting what I could do done on Tuesday night before I went on Wednesday morning. And And then I started to see how I was not getting out of it what other people were getting out of it. And I thought, okay, one of these days, someday when I do this study again, then I'll do it right. Well, I mean, that's the story of our life, right?
Exactly.
Is I'll do it better next time. And then I realized this particular study, they used to, it's not this way anymore, but they used to, for the sake of other people being able to, get in and their numbers, they were like, well, you can only do a study one time. And when I realized that, I thought, oh, this is my only opportunity. And I really started praying, talking to God, I wouldn't say with a humble heart in the beginning. I really was like, God, I really don't have time. I don't see how I could take the time every single day to do this. I had preschoolers. It didn't make any sense. It didn't compute. And because I asked, God answered and said, you've got this time every morning after I would drop my oldest off to school. I would come home, put my younger two, let them have their TV time of the day while I would drink my coffee, which I loved. It was kind of a nice little morning ritual. And I would get on and I would check out my coupon deals. I was very into couponing at the time. And God was like, you're doing that every day. You could read the Bible instead of that. And I was like, okay, but I really like my coffee time. I really like that time. But I did. I switched it out, because it was not a matter of, oh, no, I don't have enough time. It was, I'm spending time on something else. And in reality, this other thing is more worthy of my time than other things, right? And so I needed to find a thing I could pull out of the day and instead do this Bible reading time. And then that transformed my life. The consistent daily reading and seeing how the Holy Spirit would show me something that applied to that moment of life that was written in Scripture thousands of years ago. Like, it just was so mind-boggling, and it really changed my relationship with God because it made it so incredibly personal as I saw that happen consistently day after day to a point where I could trust that it was going to happen, that I could expect that I would read something that would apply to exactly where I was. And that's when I really grasped the, living, breathing Word of God, how that's a thing. Yes, it really does apply to my actual right now, everyday life. And so it was hard, it's hard to give up something. And me looking at coupon deals was not a bad thing. It was one of the ways that we were making it, as a family with young kids and one income. But I had to make the space for this thing that was better. And God provided, and it didn't send us to bankruptcy for me to give up that time and instead devote that time to my time with God.
Well, and very likely you were sowing the spiritual seeds that were needed to be planted to grow the kind of business and ministry that you have today, because you
Absolutely.
did swap the good stuff for the best stuff. I'm David Warren, talking with author Dana K. White about her newest book, Jesus Doesn't Care About Your Messy House. He Cares About Your Heart, out on Thomas Nelson Publishers, available wherever books are sold. The audiobook is read by Dana herself. It's available on audible.com, and a wonderful website you can visit after today's program is aslobcomesclean.com, aslobcomesclean.com. Plus, check out my previous interviews, including today's interview with Dana, on our website here at Oasis, oasisnetwork.org. Go to the Roadshow section. Well, we have just a few more moments with Dana when we come back, so stay tuned, and I promise you it will be great. Back after this. I'm David Warren, Program Director at Oasis Radio Network and one of the hosts of this podcast. All of our hosts enjoy hearing from you, our listening family, so drop us a note. Our email address is roadshow@oasisnetwork.org. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast and you'll receive new episodes on your mobile devices. And now, back to the show. Our guest today has been Dana K. White, author of the new book, Jesus Doesn't Care About Your Messy House. He Cares About Your Heart. This book is out on Thomas Nelson Publishers, available wherever books are sold, plus the audiobook is voiced by Dana on audible.com. Let's talk about your website, Dana, slobcomesclean.com. What will people find when they go there?
That is my home base. That is the blog that I started back in 2009 anonymously, did not think it would go anywhere, didn't want to ever have my face on it or anything or my real name on it. So it's got the beginnings, it has me figuring things out as I was going. So it's the real-time discoveries there. But also you can find links to my podcast, my YouTube channel, my books, other, products that I have created over the years to help, walk people and guide people through getting their house under control. So there's lots of ways to learn, whatever kind of learner you are. We basically have it there for you.
Last time you and I spoke, you had just cracked the 100,000 subscriber mark on your YouTube channel, and now I see that you're up to 250,000 subscribers. Something that is resonating with your viewers, Dana. What are these videos about? Tell us what kind of things you cover in your videos on YouTube.
Well, here's the thing. I don't come up with new stuff. And that is not normal in this world of what we do here online, of people doing similar things to me. I'm not going to keep coming up with, okay, now you need to do this. Well, now you need to go into your laundry room and put in this new system, and then here's a new one, because that's the temptation in this world of creating content. Instead, I just dive more deeply into the concepts. I'm like, okay, well, let's, if we know that starting with the trash is the way to get you out of the decluttering paralysis and, do this. Okay, well, let's apply it to this situation. Okay, well, let's apply it to this situation. Let's apply it to this situation. So I do things where I dive deeper into things. I also, once a month-ish, not really, maybe once every 6 weeks, I will share a video that I call the 1 Hour Betters, where I have worked with somebody. They're willing to be on YouTube, which is not everybody's willing to, and I completely understand that, where we work through their space and we apply the no mess decluttering process to their space. And I hear from people a lot that those are incredibly helpful to them to see it being applied to all sorts of different situations.
All right. You can check out Dana's videos on her website, slobcomesclean.com, or simply go to YouTube and type in Dana K. White, that's initial K, or just a slob comes clean, and they all pull up. Make sure you subscribe, and they will be in your feed in the future. Dana, thank you for your time once again. What is your goal for this new book? Jesus doesn't care about your messy house. He cares about your heart.
My goal is for those who already know Jesus to know him more deeply and to understand his grace so that they can let go of the shame. And then, because the shame is gone, then just move forward on their house without it being something that causes them such despair. Instead, just have the hope. But honestly, also my other goal is that many people who know me and have a relationship with me because I have helped them in their home, but they don't know Jesus, will read this book because we're friends. And they might not have any other Christian friends, but, my goal is that they truly understand who Jesus is and his deep desire to have a personal relationship with them through this book that, they might not read any other book ever that has Jesus in the title, but they'll read it because they know me.
Well, you've made a lot more new friends today, Dana, our Roadshow listeners, and we thank you once again for your time. I said this the last time we were on the air, and I'd like to repeat it. Dana K. White is a delight, and we're so glad that you were with us. Well, I'm sure you're working on another great book. We'll find out about that in the future. But in the meanwhile, we thank you for listening. I'm David Warren, and it's been another great Roadshow. You've been listening to The Roadshow. If you'd like to write to us, here's our address. The Roadshow, P.O. Box 1924, Tulsa, Oklahoma, 74101. Our email address is roadshow@oasisnetwork.org. The views of today's guest aren't necessarily those of this station.
but we do appreciate and thank our guest for spending this time with us. The Road Show, an Oasis Network presentation.